First of all, good evening, everybody from Cork. Let me say I'm delighted to be here. Thank you to Tom for the invitation to give tonight's webinar. And this is what we do in the Western Front Association. I mean, we've been responded very well to all the restrictions imposed by COVID. So all I could say is those of you who haven't or not aware of the Western Front Association, have a look at our website, see what we do, and you'll find that there's a whole series of these webinars and plenty of other activities and things you can get from being part of the association. Right, let me say from the outset, the Great War had an impact on everybody who served in it and survived. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. Tonight, I'll be looking at Tom Barry. Now, Tom Barry, I'm sure most of you know, was one of the most significant members who fought on the Republican sides during the War of Independence, the Irish Revolution, the Anglo-Irish conflict, call it what you want. But tonight, my job is not to look at that. What I'll be doing tonight is looking at Tom Barry and ask how the son of an RIC man, somebody who fought for king and country in the Great War, how he made that transition from gunner to guerrilla. And I may add, if I may paraphrase William Shakespeare, my job tonight is not to bury Barry or to praise him, simply to examine how he made that transition. So what I'll be doing, sorry, no, things should be working here, but they're not. Stay with me now a second. Technology, here we go. I'll be looking at Tom Barry's early life. Then, using a variety of sources, I'll examine his decision to join the British Army, his wartime service, his post-war activities, and his decision to join the IRA. And let me say, I'm aware that a number of people from all parts of the world has tuned in tonight, so I'll be using some of the text up on screen as well, just in case people have difficulty understanding my Cork accents. So just by way of orientation, most of the locations I'll be talking about are in the southwest of Ireland. So just to give those of you who wouldn't be familiar with the geography some idea of what I'm talking about, you'll hear me mention Cloughlin in County Kerry. That's up there. I'll be going from there to Rosscarbery on the southwest coast of Cork, to the town of Bandon, and indeed Cork City. So like I said, for those of you who wouldn't be too familiar with the geography of that part of Ireland, that's the main layout. So Tom Barry's early years. He was born in Cloughlin, County Kerry, we just saw on the 1st of July, 1897. He was the second eldest of 13 children, born to RIC Constable Thomas Barry and his wife Margaret. After his father left the force in 1907, the family moved to the Arcade in Rosscarbery, lovely picturesque town off the coast of Cork. And that's the Arcade. It's actually a small little shop. So like I said, that was Tom Barry's home after his dad left the RIC. Barry, after his primary education, went to Mungret College in County Limerick. That's a college that prepared people for the priesthood. So he attended there from the 25th of August 1911 to the 12th of September 1912. However, the college register records that student Barry, and I quote, went home. In other words, he ran away without the knowledge of his superiors, and it was evident, I think, to all that he had no vocation. So having said that, that's Mungret College. In 1915, like many other thousands of other people throughout Ireland and indeed in County Cork, he decided to join the British Army. And those of you who haven't seen it, there we have a photograph of Tom Barry in his British Army uniform. Now, like I said, I'll be looking at a variety of sources to look at his motivation and what other biographers have said about Barry. So one of the main source of his own perspective on why he joined the British Army was his own biography, Guerrilla Days in Ireland, which was published in 1949. And this is what he said. In June of my 17th year, I decided to see what this great war is like. I cannot plead I went on the advice of John Redmond or any other politician, that if we fought for the British, we would secure home rule for Ireland. Nor can I say I understood what home rule meant. I was not influenced by the lurid appeal to fight to save Belgium or small nations. I knew nothing about nations, large or small. I went to war for no other reason than I wanted to see what war was like, to get a gun, to see new countries, and to feel a grown man. Above all, I went because I knew no Irish history and had no national consciousness. So that's Tom Barry explaining his motivations for joining the British Army. His biographer, Rita Ryan, this is what I would call the official biography, published in 1903, also mentioned his decision to join the British Army. But young Tom was looking for adventure. In 1915, Britain at war with Germany was looking for new recruits in Ireland. So on the 30th of June, Tom, with a friend, Frank McMurrough, enlisted in the RFA in Cork. First, he went to Athlone, which was the Royal Field Artillery depot in Ireland, and then to Woolwich. When the army was about to embark for France, news of their requirement in Mesopotamia, now Iraq, meant that they had to head in that direction. He was offered a commission in the Munsters, but refused it. Now, I'll be highlighting certain things as I go along. Just take note of that, because I'll be revisiting these snippets of information as we go along. And she goes on to say, so in January 1916, Tom set foot in Basra. Here he was gassed and was taken back to Boulogne and then to the Royal Hospital in Woolwich. Soon he returned to his regiment. Now, another source of Tom Barry's early days is this book, a groundbreaking work by the Canadian historian Peter Hart. Those would dismiss it as being revisionist, but there's no doubt that it's, like I said, it was a groundbreaking work that examines violence in community in Cork. But Tom Barry was, and his activities were under the microscope, so to speak, in this book. So we'll see what Peter Hart has to say. He joined up in June 1915, lying about his age to get in. His enthusiasm, family connections, and respectable background soon earned him the offer of a commission in the Munster Fusiliers, but he turned it down to remain an artilleryman. He saw action in France and was gassed at Ypres. By Easter 1916, Bombardier, later Sergeant T.B. Barry, was in Mesopotamia, the pride of patriotic West Cork. And he quotes from a little poem that appeared in the local newspaper that read, "And what of Gunner Barry, a fearless son is he. We hope he will return with the shining bronze VC." So we'll look at some documentary evidence and see what we could glean from that, how that does it or does it not support what I just read. Well, Tom Barry appeared in the Cork Examiner on the 10th of November 1915 under the headline, "Volunteered at 16. Bombardier T.B. Barry, Royal Field Artillery Athlone, who was shown a very patriotic spirit by volunteering at the early age of 16. He was offered commission in the Munsters, but refused. He's the son of Mr. T.B. Barry of Bandon." Now, these little cameos appeared in newspapers all over Cork at the time. And what happened is young men in uniform would go into a local studio, get their photograph taken, give a few details about themselves, and the photographer would soon pass them on to the newspapers. So it would be reasonable to assume that the information that appeared in the newspaper was actually given by Barry himself. Another extract from the Skibbereen Eagle on the 21st of January 1916. Son of Thomas E. Barry of Convent Hill, Bandon, late of the Arcade, Rosscabery, volunteered for Lord Kitchener's army in June 1915, vacating a lucrative position in Cork City to do so. He received his early military training in Athlone, subsequently going to Woolwich. In the early days of December, he went with his battery to France and got into action again at Ypres. Again, France and Ypres. After 4 days in action, he got gassed and was taken back to Boulogne, thence to the Royal Herbert Hospital in Woolwich. He's progressing favourably and spent Christmas with his parents in Bandon. He was educated at Rosscabery National School and Mungret College, Limerick, where he won intermediate honours. Nothing there about how he ran away, but there you go. So, just 1 second now. Let's see, can I move this out of the way? Fortunately, Tom Barry's British service record survived. It was one of the 20% or so that survived the Luftwaffe bombing of the British Army service records in London in September 1940. Now, it was badly damaged, but from the few bits that survived, we can actually extract some very relevant information. And there you have it. He was a member of the 14th Battery, 4th Brigade, 7th Meerut Division of the Indian Army. That's what we went into. And there you'll see all the information at the top. Thomas Barry, the Arcade, Rosscabery, County Cork. Again, lied about his age and his signature down there at the bottom. And the damage around the end is water damaged when the fire was being put out in the records office. So we'll see what the record, what his service record has to say about what we've heard about already. Well, we heard or we read from the newspaper in his biography that he saw service in France, he was gassed in Ypres, and he returned home. So we'll see what his actual postings were. There you see his military history sheet. So if we just enlarge that bit of information up there and bring it over here, we'll see he was home, i.e. Britain, and I mean Britain and Ireland in that case, from 30th of June 1915 when he joined to the 20th of January. He went from there to Mesopotamia. From there in 1918, he was on board ship, spent a short spell in Egypt, back on ship and home again to Britain on the 4th of March, 1919. So again, not a single mention of service in France, being gassed at Ypres or came home. He enlisted, done his training at home, went directly from there to Mesopotamia, a spell in Egypt and back home for demobilization. And if we look at the war diary, which is available in Pew, we can actually glean what sort of actions Barry would have taken part in when he was serving in Mesopotamia. Now, what's interesting to note is that his unit actually did go to France at the start, because from the 1st of September to the 14th of October, it was actually en route from India to France. And from October to November 1914, it took part in the Battle of La Bassée and Armentières. From the 10th of March to October 1915, in the battles of Neuchâtel, Festubert, and Loos. And it's then Barry joins the unit in June 1915. Okay, so all of its service on the Western Front had taken part before Tom Barry enlisted. The unit then, from the 1st to the 22nd of January, traveled to Mesopotamia by sea. Barry's service record shows that he arrived in Mesopotamia on the 21st of January, I think it is 1916. Then his major engagement was the attempt to relieve Kut. And from January to March 1916, it took part in the battles of Wadi, Hana, and Dujalia. On the 11th of March, it took part in the capture of Baghdad. 8th of March, it went to Egypt and Palestine, which again was substantiated by the service record. There, it took part in September in the Battle of Megiddo. And of course, the armistice on the 11th of November brought the shooting war to an end. And Tom Barry's service record shows, as you saw, that he was home on the 4th of March, 1919. Home again is Britain and Ireland. And on the 17th of April 1919, he was demobilized, not discharged, very important now, and transferred to the Class Z Reserve, which effectively meant he could be recalled to the colours if the need arose. So in April 1919, he's now a member demobilized, but a member of the Class Z Reserve. Okay, we saw mention of Sergeant Tom Barry in some of the things we read there earlier on. So fortunately, the service record can give us a hint of his promotions. There you see it down at the bottom. So if we highlight that little bit up there, again, he's posted as a bombardier on the 1st of March 1916, and again, he's listed as a bombardier, which is the same as an acting corporal, one step above gunner or private, on the 17th of March 1916, and he reverted at his own request, which is interesting. We'll look at that again now in a minute. Back to gunner on the 26th of May 1916, and he's back at the base dispersal center, holding the rank of gunner on the 4th of March 1919. Again, no mention of Tom Barry ever holding the rank of sergeant. So we'll look at what sort of a soldier Tom Barry was. And again, if you want to know, I served a fair bit of time in the military. If you want to know a soldier, the first thing you do is look at his conduct sheet. So fortunately, that survived. So we look at Tom Barry's conduct sheet, and you can see he was charged on a couple of occasions, absent from 6 a.m. parade until 6:20 a.m. on the same date, not complying with an order. Sergeant Bassett charged him on this occasion. He was reprimanded, and again, it shows there on the right, as I think as you look at your screen, the officer who tried him. He was then charged with irregular conduct on the 27th of May 1916 and reprimanded. Go on, read on, late on parade, stating a falsehood, disobedience to battery orders. And on this occasion, the punishment increases. He has 7 days field punishment number 2 with loss of pay. Now, field punishment number 2 is when you're shackled to a fixed object, sometimes the wheel of a gun in the artillery. But like again, field punishment number 2 was a lesser version of that. But then we go on, he was creating a disturbance, improper reply to an NCO. And again, you could see 7 days field punishment number 2 above that, 28 days field punishment number 2. But the interesting one there is that one on the 27th of May. So we just revisit something earlier on. If you look at his rank, you'll notice that he reverted at his own request to the rank of gunner on the 26th of the 5th, 1916. Okay, there you have it. And the following day, you'll find he was actually charged, okay, with irregular conduct. Now, it doesn't elaborate what that meant. Now, the chances are Tom Barry, being a cute soldier, probably reverted before he was reverted, if you know what I'm saying. Because as an acting or a bombardier or lance corporal, call it what you want to, one of the punishments his commanding officer could have administered was to revert him in the rank. So like I said, the dates, we don't know the reason, but the dates are very similar. So there must have been some reason why he actually, the day before he was up in orders, he decided to revert at his own request. Okay, we look at his discharge. And again, we could get that information from his service record. That little extract down there. We can see he was transferred to the Class C Reserve on demobilization on the 7th of April, 1919. And if you look then at the 2 lines down, you'll see he was discharged on the 31st of March, 1920. Okay, what's interesting then, just there you have it, and he came to live at 10 Convent Hill in Bandon. That house there, it's still standing, and there's a plaque on the wall to commemorate the fact that he lived there. Right, despite the charges, what might seem serious, but not really, I suppose, discipline was very tough at the moment. He got a very good reference when he left the army. He was classed as a sober, reliable man, an intelligent, and a good, hardworking man. A reference that would get him, I'm sure, would be get him into any job when he returned home. There you see his medal index card showing that he was awarded the Victory Medal and the British War Medal as well. None of the stars because he joined too late for that. Now, what a lot of people don't know is that Tom Barry was actually in receipt of a disability pension. Okay, back to the service record. We look down there, bring it up there. His diseases were disordered action of the heart, DAH, and malaria. And if you look there, they show attributable to his service, and he got a 40% disability pension, 11 shillings per week at the start, going up to 16 shillings, commenced on the 7th of August, 1919, and it was to be reviewed in 66 weeks from the 3rd of September, 1919. So malaria, which I think would be fairly explainable in Mesopotamia, and disordered action of the heart. But what exactly is disordered action of the heart? Okay, DAH, disordered action of the heart, known then as the soldier's disease, known today as post-traumatic stress disorder. Okay, so again, back then they hadn't really diagnosed it for what it was. It was called, because of the palpitations, the shortness of breath, and the panic, and all the rest of it, doctors called it disordered action of the heart, or a nickname, or for the want of a better word, it was also known as the soldier's disease. Now, Barry is back in Ireland. He's discharged from the service. He has a good reference. So one of the first things he does is actually get involved in the next Servicemen's Association, this particular one, the National Federation of Discharged and Demobilized Sailors and Soldiers. That's a bit of a tongue twister, so I'll call it the Federation from now on. So what was the Federation? Formed in January 1917 by groups of various London-based veterans who were opposed to the Military Service Review of Exceptions Act of 1917, which would have made it possible for people who were invalided out of the armed forces to be reconscripted. And the Liberal MP James Hogg, I'm not too sure how you pronounce his second name, was actually the leader of the association. And on the 4th of December, it spread its wings, and the Cork Branch was held at a huge meeting of ex-servicemen in the City Hall. Right, what were the objectives of that federation? To watch over and promote legislation on behalf of discharged men and the dependents of deceased men. To educate public opinion with the view that the maintenance of discharged soldiers and sailors and their dependents is the direct duty of the state and should be its first care, and that they should not be dependent on charity. To secure that all men fit to serve are also fit for pensions, and such pensions should not be the subject to income tax, to watch over the grant and administration of pensions, and to prevent the exploitation of labour in connection with discharged men. All very noble objectives, and objectives to which Tom Barry signed up on. Because in June 1919, a branch of the Federation was formed in Bandon, where Tom Barry was living. And at the first meeting, he was nominated as both trustee and elected secretary. Now, he was a very young man, I think around 21 years of age at the time. So the very fact that he was able at that tender age to be elected to a leadership position, I think speaks volumes of his own personality. And there you see a fundraising ad in the local paper that appeared some bit afterwards. And there you see among the trustees, Mr. T.B. Barry, and down there you see T.B. Barry, the honorary secretary. So Tom Barry is now a key player in the Federation. Okay, like he's back home. He has embraced the whole cause of ex-servicemen. And at a meeting in Cork City Hall held on the 8th of November 1919, he was one of the keynote speakers. This meeting was attended by thousands of very angry, irate ex-servicemen looking for a bit of leadership. And there you see a resolution by Barry that appeared in the paper, and I'll read it out. We, the discharged sailors and soldiers of Cork City and County, protest against the action of the government and other responsible officials in keeping out of employment men who have served their country during the Great War. We condemn, as a breach of the promises made us, the keeping of, in government and War Department employment, civilians who, under no circumstances whatever, would serve in the Navy or Army, no matter how great the need. And we call upon those responsible to know and at once have such people replaced by discharged and demobilized men. We, who have satisfied the needs of our king and country, now call upon our king and country to satisfy our needs. And we wish it to be known that those responsible for satisfying such needs have ignobly failed. The resolution was passed, seconded as it says in the paper, and passed with acclamation. So again, we now see Tom Barry taking a key role, playing a key part in the affairs of ex-servicemen and advocating that these guys, most of whom were unemployed, should actually get jobs in government employment. And you can understand why these men who were promised a land fit for heroes when they came home to appalling conditions. Right? At the same time, Tom Barry also attended Skerries College, which is 11 St. Patrick's Hill in Cork. It no longer exists, but the building is still there. Now, the purpose of the Skerries colleges, which was set up all over the place, was to prepare young people for the civil service exam. In other words, to enter the British civil service. So why would Tom Barry attend Skerries College other than the fact that at the time he had aspirations to enter the British civil service? And that's exactly what he did. Okay, if we go back to his service record, the inside sheet, this sheet is part of the service record that records the reasons why the documents, the entire file, would have been taken out of storage and sent to be consulted by somebody, right? So if we look down there, right, bring it up there, the reason it went out, again, Forward Civil Service Commission for completion and return. And you look there, it's the 4th of the 12th, 1919. So he gave the speech condemning the fact that ex-servicemen were not employed in British government employment. And here around the same time, we could see that his service record, he did apply for British civil service, and his service record was withdrawn from the records office for consultation. In other words, to see if he fulfilled the criteria. So we now have Tom Barry applying for the British civil service. And had we any idea how he got on? Well, we actually do, because after many hours of trawling through the records in Kew, I was able to find the ledger that gave the results of civil service examinations. And in this particular one, for the appointment of male clerk, Ministry of Labour, the Reconstruction Scheme, the Ireland Division, we have the candidates who failed to pass the examination. And down there at the bottom, we have T.B. Barry. Okay, out of a total of 700 marks, he got 370. So you can see why he would have been irate at the fact that soldiers were not getting employed in British government service. But not alone that, but if you look at the service record again, and these documents do advise close inspection. If you look down at the bottom, okay, just that little entry there, asks Indian posting, 9th of February, 1920. Okay, and there was a call for documents afterwards. Unfortunately, it says posting something, but we don't know what the result was. But the very fact that on the 9th of February 1920, when the Anglo-Irish War was now in full swing, okay, Tom Barry still asked for an Indian posting. And the word posting itself is relevant because remember I said he was actually demobilized but not discharged. Anyone with military service would know that if you're part of an military organization, you could look for a posting from one unit to another. And apparently, this entry on his service record would indicate that in February 1920, Tom Barry looked for some sort of an Indian posting, but evidently didn't get it. Right, but in the meantime, in the midst of all that, there was some disillusionment with the Federation, and it appeared that the Bandon branch had disintegrated, for the want of a better word. So a meeting was held in Bandon on the 10th of June 1920 to reform the branch. And again, Barry was one of the main speakers. You can't read that, but I'll extract a bit here. Barry opposed the forming of a branch of the Federation of Discharged and Demobilized Sailors and Soldiers Association. He had some experience of it there already, and they were sleepy and lazy. He started a branch 10 months ago, and it fell through. And what guarantee had they that it would not fall through again? When the branch broke up, they had almost £45 credit, and it was divided among the poor of the town, the Cork Branch and the Transport Union. He, Barry, would have the pleasure in joining a branch of the Ex-Servicemen's Association, a new organisation that was springing up. There had been several attempts recently in the south of Ireland to bring ex-servicemen into politics, and papers were sent around for them to sign saying they were boycotted. Well, that was a thing that should not be done. He did not think any man in Bandon was boycotted because he was an ex-serviceman. Papers were being distributed to that effect. If that's what they call patriotism, he did not know what to think of it. He said that as an Irishman, he would not become the tool of any political party. So as an alternative proposal, he proposed the formation of a branch of the Ex-Servicemen's Association, but on this occasion, he failed to get a seconder. This is June 1920, and like I said, the Anglo-Irish War was escalating with every passing week. And just the political landscape in Ireland had changed dramatically. We had the 1916 Rising, while Barry was away in Mesopotamia, the execution of the leaders, the sweeping Sinn Féin victory in the 1918 general election, the failure of the Irish Convention to reach any sort of political settlement. And in Cork, on January, you had the coalition of Sinn Féin and transport workers candidates won a majority in the Cork City municipal elections. And interestingly enough, ex-servicemen, they fielded a number of candidates, but they managed to win 2 out of 56 seats. Again, as I said, the IRA attacks on Crown forces and RIC barracks throughout the country and indeed the county were escalating. On the 20th of March, Cork's Lord Mayor Tom Barry was shot dead by the RIC at his home. The Black and Tans arrived in Cork 5 days later. And on the 24th of April, ex-servicemen had a major clash with the police in Cork. So now we had the first example, or not the first, but a major example of the ex-servicemen actually clashing with the security forces. And the following month, they actually occupied the Army and Navy's pensions office in Cork in protest at the way pensions were being administered. They weren't happy with the amounts they were getting, or what they considered to be the lax way, the length of time of the paperwork was being done. And on the 17th of July, there was a major event, a major IRA operation. They burst into, I think it was the City and County Club, and this IRA unit killed RIC Divisional Commissioner Lieutenant Colonel Gerald Bryce Ferguson Smith in the Cork County Club, in the County Club in Cork. Now, this was a major operation that I sent shockwaves through the security forces in Ireland at the time. And immediately afterwards, the following day, a series of clashes took place between the security forces and the ex-servicemen in Cork. And that night, there was a large crowd of ex-servicemen who were attending the Cork Opera House to see one of their former comrades in a boxing match. And afterwards, we had a major a case where the ex-servicemen fought the servicemen. Because, like I said, a large crowd of ex-servicemen were making away from the Opera House. They headed up to North Main Street, where they encountered a group of British soldiers. A serious altercation ensued, during which this man, former member of the Royal Field Artillery, James Burke, I think, was bayoneted to death by the British soldiers. So again, this outraged the thousands of ex-servicemen that were in Cork City and County at the time. And at his funeral, which took place on the 20th, James Burke's name was, his funeral would take place on the 20th of July, was attended by over 5,000 ex-servicemen. And they used, up in the top, you could see him forming a guard of honour as his coffin was being taken out of the North Cathedral. And below, you could see the large crowds and the ex-servicemen marching behind and carrying his coffin out to the cemetery. Like I said, over 5,000 ex-servicemen outraged that their former comrades in khaki should do such a thing. And if we look at the funeral, if we look at the reports of the funeral, there we see, looking it up there, among those attending from Bandon was a Thomas Barry. And not alone did he attend, but if you look down the bottom, the Guard of Honour consisted of the following ex-soldiers. And there we have mention of a Sergeant T.B. Barry from the Royal Field Artillery. Now, this is the last mention, or the last public mention of Tom Barry in the newspapers, or the last record we have of him taking part in any activities mounted by the ex-servicemen. So who is he? In July 1920, who is Tom Barry? Well, we have a young man, the son of a policeman, somebody who went off and fought for king and country, who came back wounded in body and scarred in mind, somebody who was unable to get a job with the British Civil Service, who was unable to get a posting to India, somebody who was to the forefront of ex-servicemen's activity and was clearly outraged by the fact that how his fellow ex-servicemen were being treated. And that summer, he made a critical decision, and one that would change his life and indeed lead to the changing of the nature of the conflict that was being fought in Cork. And that summer, like I said, he applied to join the Irish Republican Army. And we'll just look at his application at and what's said about it. In guerrilla days in Ireland, he calls it the awakening. And he says, for me, it began in far off Mesopotamia. It was there, then a battleground for two contending imperialistic armies of Britain and Turkey, that I awoke to the echo of guns being fired in the capital of my own country, Ireland. The rude awakening came in the month of May 1916. One evening, I strolled to the orderly tent outside, which war communiques were displayed. These one usually scanned in a casual manner, but for even then, war news was accepted in a most sceptical manner. But this evening, there was a special communique headed Rebellion in Dublin. It told of the shelling of the Dublin GPO and Liberty Hall, of hundreds of rebels killed, thousands arrested, and leaders being executed. And he says, 1917 saw a return from the borders of Asiatic Russia to Egypt, Palestine, Italy, and France, and in 1919, England. I reached Cork in February 1919. He goes on to say, he approached Sean Buckley of Bandon, telling him who I was and that I wanted to join the IRA. Buckley told me to return again, and at a later meeting asked me not to parade as yet with the local company, but to act as an intelligence officer against the British military and their supports in the Bandon area. So began my connection with the IRA. So that's Barry's account, how he found his way to the IRA. Nothing at all mentioned about his application to join the British Civil Service, or indeed his activities with the Ex-Servicemen's Association. I suppose that's understandable. His official biography says, back in Ireland since February 1919, he was constantly seen in the company of the British Army personnel stationed in Bandon and fraternised with ex-British soldiers. His critics condemned him for such actions, but he maintained that he went with the spirit of those who fought with him. And this is critical again, and you can understand how this episode would have had an impact on him. One day, Tom and a companion were stopped by British forces in Bandon, and Tom was taken off to the barracks. Apparently, he got, quote, a bit of a hiding. This, it seems, was to obtain information about the IRA that he would have been expected to obtain from the Hales family, very famous Republican family in Bandon. Whether it was also meant as a warning, it certainly had that effect on Tom. The result was that a changed Tom Barry emerged. He admitted that he was, quote, held up several times and questioned about people who had seen no war. The arrogance of the conqueror, the invader, made me realize someday if there was a fight coming, I would be on the side of Ireland. So again, you must try to understand the psychological impact if this incident took place. There's Tom Barry arrested, lifted by his former comrades in khaki, and he gets a bit of a hiding. So add that to all of the other disappointments he experienced since he returned home. Peter Hart says the first public act for which he's remembered is the raising of the Union Jack on Armistice Day 1919, the actions of a very loyal ex-serviceman. Local volunteers felt he could have gone either way, and that his turn to republicanism was occasioned by a break with the Veterans Association in Bandon. And as we had seen, there was such a break with the Bandon branch of the Federation. Sergeant Barry, again reference to Sergeant Barry, returned home in early 1919. Like his fellow veterans who ended up in the auxiliary division, Barry did not adjust easily to civilian life. He palled around with other ex-soldiers, but also sought out volunteers and eventually tried several times to join the Bandon IRA. He disliked and was disliked by one of the most important IRA families in the district, and it was even rumored that he was a spy. And you can understand the IRA's reluctance to take somebody who had served in the British Army into their ranks. Local prejudice kept him out of the movement until late summer of 1920. So when it came to recording or looking for an IRA pension, this is an extract from Tom Barry's application for his IRA pension. You can see there he claimed that he was a member of the IRA from the 2nd of July 1919 to the 31st of March 1920. That was the first period that he claimed for. And again, you could see he carried out instructions regarding intelligence and activity, preventing British soldiers from force from attacking citizens and so forth, okay? So again, he claimed that he remembered the IRA in 1919, but when it came to issuing pensions at the time, the Irish government were very careful, and applicants had to go through a bit of a grueling process to ascertain the truth or otherwise of their applications. There you see the dates. So Sean Buckley, who Barry mentioned in his evidence on behalf of Tom Barry, said he joined sometime early in 1920, okay? And then he goes on to say that he was spying on ex-servicemen's organizations. But however, Liam Deasy, who was a prominent member of the unit, in fact, the brigade adjutant, went on to say, when did he join? He says, in August 1920, it was early in August. And that was sort of tally. Like I said, he was carrying the coffin of James Burke in July 1920, and he was very much involved in ex-servicemen's activities prior to that. So as it turned out, if you look there, and I won't bore you with the details, he was actually only awarded 1 month up until March 1920 and afterwards. So the fact that he claimed he joined in July 1919 didn't meet the criteria, was say, for the award of a pension. Okay. So shortly after that, again, Tom Barry ended the ballads of IRA history when he conducted the Kilmichael ambush, which saw 17 auxiliaries and 3 members of his own flying column killed, and that the actions around that ambush have continued to be hotly debated and will be hotly debated for a while yet. But again, like I said, tonight, we're not here to talk about the Kilmichael ambush. We'll talk about the impact that the Great War and its aftermath had on Tom Barry. And shortly afterwards, you could see what he took home with him from the Great War would have an impact and perhaps save his life. This was a controversial incident that occurred shortly after the Kilmichael ambush on the 3rd of December, 1920, when it was arranged that Barry would meet with 2 deserters from the British Army who said they would give him plans on how to attack Bandon Barracks. So an arrangement was made to meet with them on the evening of the 3rd of December. These 2 guys were Private Percy Taylor and Thomas Watling, I think, of the Essex Regiment. I could be mistaken in that, but the Essex Regiment was the main unit in Bandon at the time. Major Percival was there, later to win fame as the man who surrendered Singapore. So on the evening of the 3rd of December, Barry picked these 3 men, James O'Donoghue, Joseph Begley, and John Galvin. They acquired a car and they arranged to travel some 100 yards or something outside the town of Bandon, where they were supposed to meet with Taylor and Watling and obtain this information and anything else they were willing to give. The 3 boys get into a car, but just as Tom Barry was going in, this is what happened. During the action of the previous Sunday at Kilmichael, so sharp was the sudden spasm of pain that struck me, I thought I had been wounded in the chest. Several similar but lesser pains had occurred afterwards, but did not appear serious. Now, with my foot actually on the running board of the Ford car, something seemed to hit me violently in the chest again, and I knew no more. When I regained consciousness some hours after my collapse, a priest was anointing me and a doctor was also in attendance. The doctor said that through my injury, my heart was seriously displaced and that under no circumstances could I be moved. For 4 days, I lay nearly motionless in McCarthy's at Kilmoylerein, and on the 5th day, I was lifted into a motor car and taken to the Mercy home in Cork, that's the Mercy Hospital. So just as Barry was about to get into the car and meet the rendezvous with the two deserters, this occurred and he went flat, and like I said, he was taken away. However, the three boys carried on to the rendezvous, and if we look at the following morning's papers, we'll see ambush near Bandon, 3 civilians found dead, Bandon, 3 civilians shot dead again. And what actually happened is when the boys went to the outskirts of Bandon, they didn't meet the two deserters, but they met a party of the Essex Regiment who were waiting for them, and they opened fire. And James O'Donoghue, Joseph Bedley, and John Galvin were killed. Now, needless to say, the IRA were outraged by this, and a couple of days afterwards, they managed to exact their revenge by capturing Taylor and Watling and executing him. So you could argue here that Barry's ill health or his post-traumatic stress disorder probably on this occasion actually saved his life. So back to his service record. And like I said, he was awarded a disability pension. And you can see it was to be renewed for 66 weeks from the 3rd of the 9th, 1919. Now, there is no further information about the pension on Barry's service records. However, right, there you see the dates. Fortunately, the Western Front Association was able to rescue thousands upon thousands of actual pension cards that goes into some detail about disability pensions and pensions paid to wives and ever. And fortunately, we were able to extract Tom Barry's one here. There you see it, Tom Barry, Royal Field Artillery, Convent Hill, Bandon, County Cork. Again, his disabilities were listed as malaria and DAH, and the rank was given as gunner, not sergeant. So if you go to the second page, right, and we look at that there, and if we enlarge it, we'll see that the date of the award, okay, from the 7th of the 8th, 1919 to the 2nd of September, 1919, right? If we carry on then, from the 3rd of September to the 7th of December, 1920, 40% again, from the 8th of the 12th, 1920 to the 6th of the 12th, 21, go down again to the 5th of the 12th, 22, and there was interim payments of 16 shillings a week up until the 3rd, I think it was this June 1923. So what would have happened for the pension to be renewed is Tom Barry or any soldier would have had to present themselves to a board of British Army doctors and there's one of the hospitals around Ireland at the time, and they would be examined because the disability pension wasn't awarded automatically. So he would at some stage would have had to present himself to a board of military doctors for the pensions to be renewed. And there you see the date of the awards, 14th of October and so forth down the left-hand side then, right up until February 1923. And like I said, at this stage, so we know at the time of the Kilmichael ambush, the Cross Barry ambush and other activities Barry took part in on behalf of the IRA, it was actually in receipt of a 40% British Army disability pension, right? Eventually, his card is shown as dead. That means the pension disappeared. I don't know what the date at the bottom is, but I think it's the 18th of the 2nd, 26. And again, I'm open to correction on that. But what did the British know about all of this? What did they know about Tom Barry? They weren't paying a British Army pension. Well, if we look again, if we refer to his pension file, this document there lists documents that would have been extracted and sent away for examination, okay? List the documents up there. This actually occurred on the 16th of August, 1921, when they were received in Woolwich. And the cause, what was the cause? Why did they go? Well, I'm not going to ask you to crane your necks sideways, but if you look here, okay, it went from the Officer IC, Royal Horse Artillery and Royal Field Artillery records for some sort of verification based on a secret letter from 6th Division Artillery. Now, the 6th Division was based in Cork at the time. So chances are they probably knew what Barry was about. Why else would they send a secret letter? And if you look at his Dublin Castle file, which is available in the National Archives in Kew, look at that little bit down there. What did they know about Tom Barry? You see, he led a small column against the auxiliary RIC in the Kilmichael ambush and was also in charge of the party which was dispersed by the RIC near Rosscarbery. He also led the attack on Rosscarbery RIC barracks. And interestingly enough, they said he suffered from a swollen head. Notwithstanding his swollen head or anything else, it's clear that Dublin Castle knew their man, and yet he was able to continue to draw a British Army pension for the entire duration of the War of Independence, and indeed for most of the Irish Civil War. So that, if we look at it, was the transition from gunner to guerrilla. We had Tom Barry, the loyal son of a constable in the RIC, went off to join the British Army, fought for king and country at Mesopotamia, came back, like I said, wounded in body, scarred in mind, unable to get British Army employment, outraged by the conduct of his ex-servicemen and the conditions they were getting, outraged by the conditions being endured by his fellow ex-servicemen, and physically abused by his comrades in khaki. So by July 1920, the process was complete. The transition from gunner to guerrilla was complete. And for the rest of his life, Tom Barry's activities in the IRA and his activities with the Republican movement would come to define him. Very little has been said about his British Army service in Mesopotamia. Very little has been said, or nothing at all has been said, about his activities promoting, trying to look after, improve conditions for ex-servicemen, or indeed the fact that he was still in receipt of a British Army pension. Now that, like I said, is not to denigrate Barry, it's not to praise him, it's just to highlight the impact that a war, the Great War, can make on the decisions taken by one person when they came home. And for Tom Barry, I'm sure you could read hundreds, if not thousands, of other ex-servicemen who were disgruntled all over Ireland, all over Britain, and indeed all over Europe. So, like I said, I'm not going to talk about his IRA activities here. That's maybe a conversation we could have for another occasion, only to say that his campaign that he waged against the Crown forces in West Cork has been studied by military organizations all over the world, and I can vouch for that because on occasion I've had officers from Quantico in the States, Marine officers, and I brought them down to West Cork, and they studied his campaign both from the insurgents' perspective and also from a counter-insurgency point of view. And indeed, I've also discussed this with British Army officers over the years. So like I said, his guerrilla campaign continues to be examined in some depth by soldiers and indeed military organizations all over the world. But like I said, I'll end here by saying that he passed away on the 2nd of July 1980. There you'll see his headstone. He's buried in St. Finbarr Cemetery in Cork, again shown as a member of the Irish Republican Army, a commandant of the West Cork Flying Column, buried with his wife Leslie, who was a member of the GPO garrison during the 1916 Rising and the chairman, or chairwoman, I should say, or chair of the Irish Red Cross Society for over 20 years. So what can we say about this? Well, first of all, I think Tom Barry's road to rebellion was far more complex than the account he wrote in his book, Guerrilla Days in Ireland. And that's probably understandable in the Ireland that he was living in. He probably wasn't too anxious to highlight the fact that too much about his service with the British Army, or indeed that he tried to join the British Civil Service. According to his service record, he never, as stated in some biographies, held the rank of sergeant in the British Army, was offered a commission, served on the Western Front, or indeed was gassed. He suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, and thanks to the Western Front Association, the records they retrieved, we could see that he received a disability pension for that and malaria at least up until 1923. It appears that the British security forces knew about Barry's IRA activities at the time he was in receipt of his pension. His application for a civil service commission and an Indian posting supports the view that after the war, he could have gone either way. His experience of the Great War and the conditions experienced by veterans of the conflict when they returned home were probably, undoubtedly, I would say, instrumental in his own radicalization, and not only that, but the radicalization of countless other ex-servicemen who joined the Republican movement. And Ireland's experience in the Great War, which I don't think is actually looked at enough, I believe was a major factor that contributed to the Irish Revolution. And I'll finish up by one saying by my favorite documentary maker, Ken Burns: there is no single truth in war. Thank you.